I watched my daughter's champagne-soaked dress drip onto the Italian marble as 200 guests pretended not to stare. And that's when I realized my family had finally crossed a line they couldn't uncross. But let me back up, because you need to understand how we got here. My name is Julia Brennan, and 6 weeks ago, I thought I knew exactly who I was in this family. I'm 42, a partner at Caldwell and Associates PR firm in Greenwich, Connecticut, divorced for 3 years, and mother to Patricia, the smartest 10-year-old I've ever known. My brother Chase was getting married to Vanessa Hartley, daughter of the Hartley Hotels empire, and my parents were throwing them a wedding that cost more than most people's houses, $2 million for one day. The engagement party alone had a $100,000 budget. My mother, Eleanor Brennan, had spent the last year planning every detail like she was orchestrating a royal coronation. My father, Richard Brennan, just signed the checks and smiled for the society page photographs. I should mention that my family has money, real money, the kind that comes with a last name people recognize in certain circles. My father built Brennan Capital from the ground up, turned it into one of the most respected private equity firms in the Northeast. We grew up in a 12,000 square foot house in Bellhaven, went to the right schools, joined the right clubs. My sister Diane married into old Boston money, has 2 kids, lives in Beacon Hill in a townhouse that's been in her husband's family since 1890. Chase followed Dad into the business. I was supposed to marry well and chair charity committees. Instead, I got my MBA, started my own career, married a man my parents merely tolerated, and when that marriage imploded because he couldn't keep his hands off his dental hygienist, I rebuilt my life on my own terms. My parents never quite forgave me for any of it, but I thought, naively, that they at least respected Patricia. She's their granddaughter, after all, their blood. The rehearsal dinner was my first warning that something was deeply wrong. We were at the Pemberton Club, this exclusive waterfront venue that required 3 board members to sponsor your reservation. I arrived with Patricia, who wore a navy blue dress I'd picked out specially, her dark hair pulled back with a velvet ribbon. She looked beautiful and grown up, and I was proud walking in with her. My mother intercepted us at the entrance, her smile tight and practiced. "Julia, darling. Patricia, sweetheart." She kissed the air near my cheek. "I need to discuss the seating arrangements. Patricia, why don't you go find the children's table? It's in the sunroom." I blinked. "Children's table? Mom, she's part of the family. She should be at our table." My mother's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered behind her eyes. "The family table is quite full, dear. Besides, she'll have more fun with the other children." There were no other children in the sunroom, just Patricia sitting alone at a table set for 8, picking at her chicken while the adults laughed and toasted in the main dining room. I moved her to my table after 20 minutes, and my mother's lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. My father avoided looking at us entirely. That night, Patricia asked me why Grandma Eleanor kept calling Diane's son Cooper our precious grandson, but only called her Patricia without any adjectives. Kids notice everything, you know? They hear the things we think we're hiding in our tone. I told her that Grandma was just stressed about the wedding, that it didn't mean anything. But I couldn't sleep that night. I kept replaying interactions from the past year, little moments I'd dismissed as my parents being busy or distracted. The Christmas card they'd sent to their friends featuring Cooper and his younger sister Madison, but not Patricia. The family photo session they'd scheduled on a weekend they knew Patricia had a violin recital. The way my mother introduced Patricia to her friends as Julia's daughter, but introduced Cooper as our brilliant grandson. How had I missed this pattern? Or had I been seeing it all along and just refusing to believe my own parents could be that cruel? The wedding days started at dawn. I was up at 5 helping Patricia get ready, making sure her flower girl dress was perfect. It was blush pink with pearl buttons, custom made by the same designer who'd done Vanessa's gown. $3,000 for a child's dress she'd wear for 4 hours. That's the kind of wedding this was. Patricia was excited, nervous, practicing her walk down the aisle in our hotel room. "Do I smile the whole time, Mom, or just look straight ahead?" I kissed her forehead. "You just be yourself, baby. You're gonna be perfect." The ceremony was at 2 o'clock at St. Mary's Cathedral, followed by a reception at Meridian Hall, this historic mansion with gardens that looked like something out of a movie. I got Patricia to the cathedral by noon for photos and final preparations. The bridal suite was chaos. Vanessa's sisters and bridesmaids everywhere, champagne flowing, a makeup artist working on 3 faces at once. My mother was in the center of it all, directing traffic like a general. She saw Patricia and smiled. "Oh, good, you're here. Patricia, they need you in the flower girl holding room. Down the hall, 3rd door on the left." I started to follow, but my mother caught my arm. "Julia, I need you for family photos. Diane's already there." Something in her voice made me hesitate, but Patricia nodded at me. "I'm okay, Mom. I know what to do." I watched her walk down that hallway, her little shoulders back, trying so hard to be grown up, and I felt a twist in my chest I couldn't name. The family photos took 45 minutes. Every combination you can imagine. Parents with Chase, parents with Diane and me, parents with all 3 kids, parents with grandchildren, which meant Cooper and Madison posing with Eleanor and Richard while the photographer called out directions about chins and smiles. I waited for them to call Patricia. They never did. When I asked, my mother said, "Oh, we already got the flower girl shots earlier," except they hadn't because Patricia had been with me all morning. I let it go because I was trying to keep the peace, trying not to make waves on Chase's wedding day. That was mistake number 1. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll give them that. 200 guests in a cathedral with arrangements of white orchids that probably cost more than a car. Patricia walked down that aisle like a princess, steady and poised, and I felt my throat tighten watching her. But during the family introduction moment, when the priest acknowledged both families, my mother had specifically requested that only Cooper and Madison be mentioned as the grandchildren who light up Eleanor and Richard's lives. Patricia's name was never spoken. I saw her little face in the front row, trying to understand why she wasn't included, and something inside me started to crack. But I held it together. I smiled. I clapped. I played my part, because that's what Brennans do. We maintain appearances, no matter what's happening underneath. The reception was where everything fell apart. Meridian Hall was transformed into something out of a fairy tale. String lights in the gardens, an orchestra playing, tables decorated with arrangements that took a team of florists 3 days to create. The bar alone had 15 different cocktails named after moments in Chase and Vanessa's relationship. I'd found our assigned table, relieved to see Patricia's name card next to mine. We were at table 7, which was fine. Not the family table, but close enough. Then Diane appeared, Cooper and Madison trailing behind her. She looked at our table, looked at Patricia, and her expression shifted into something I'd seen before, but never directed at my daughter. Disgust mixed with condescension. "Julia, there's been a seating change. Patricia's going to be at the children's table after all." My temperature rose. "There is no children's table, Diane. You told me that yourself. This is where we're sitting." She lowered her voice, leaning close. "Look, Mom and Dad specifically requested that the family tables maintain a certain presentation, you understand." I didn't understand. Or maybe I understood too well and was refusing to accept it. "Patricia is family. She sits with me." Diane's husband, Preston, appeared then, all boarding school posture and inherited smugness. "Come on, Julia, don't make this difficult. It's just for a few hours. Patricia can sit with the wedding coordinator's assistant's kids. They're her age." Except there were no other kids. This was an adult wedding, black tie, sophisticated. They wanted Patricia removed from view, erased from the family narrative they were presenting to Greenwich's elite. And suddenly I was seeing my parents' treatment of my daughter with absolute clarity. This wasn't stress or distraction. This was deliberate exclusion. This was them deciding that Patricia didn't count because her father was just a dentist who couldn't keep his marriage vows, because I'd gotten divorced, because we didn't fit their perfect family image. Before I could respond, Cooper, Diane's 12-year-old, spoke up in a voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "She's not really family anyway. She's just the flower girl." Patricia's face went white. Madison giggled. Diane didn't correct her son. That's when my mother arrived, impeccable in her custom Armani gown, diamonds at her throat that could fund a small country. "Is there a problem here?" Her voice was pleasant, but her eyes were steel. I opened my mouth, but Diane beat me to it. "Julia's being difficult about the seating arrangements." My mother's hand landed on my shoulder, her grip tighter than necessary. Julia, darling, let's not create a scene. Patricia can sit where she's assigned. Diane's right. We need family at the family tables. The subtext was deafening. Patricia wasn't family, not in the way that mattered to Eleanor and Richard Brennan, not in the way that would show well in the society photos that would run in Greenwich Magazine and the New York Times wedding section. I looked at my daughter, at her confused, hurt expression, and I made a decision. We're staying at this table, both of us, or we're leaving entirely. My mother's mask slipped for just a second. You wouldn't dare ruin your brother's wedding. I would have walked out right then. I should have walked out right then. But Chase appeared. Chase, who'd I'd driven to school every morning for 3 years when we were kids. Chase, who'd called me crying when his first girlfriend dumped him. Chase, who I thought knew me better than anyone. Jules, come on, just let Patricia sit at the other table. It's not a big deal. He didn't even look at her when he said it. His own niece was standing right there, and he couldn't meet her eyes. That's when I knew this wasn't just my parents. This was all of them. This was the entire family I'd spent 42 years believing would have my back, and they were united in deciding that my daughter was less than, that she was disposable. I was about to grab Patricia's hand and leave when my father arrived, and he did something I never thought I'd see. He looked at Patricia and said to the people gathering nearby, curious about the commotion, "Oh, this is just the little maid's daughter. She's not part of the family seating." Not my granddaughter, not Julia's daughter, the maid's daughter. Like Patricia was somehow beneath notice, beneath acknowledgement, beneath basic human dignity. Patricia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She just stood there, a 10-year-old child in a $3,000 dress being told by her own grandfather that she was nobody. And I realized that my parents had never seen her as family. They'd been waiting for me to remarry someone appropriate, produce new children with better pedigree, and when that didn't happen, they'd just written her off entirely. Cooper was the real grandson because he had the right last name, the right lineage, the right everything. Patricia was just evidence of my failure to live up to Brennan's standards. I was about to explode, about to say things that couldn't be unsaid, when Diane made the worst possible choice. She stepped forward with her champagne glass, aimed at Patricia, and said, "Just step away from the family, sweetie. Go find where you actually belong." And then she accidentally tipped that glass, pouring Dom Perignon all over Patricia's dress. The champagne soaked through the pink silk, dripping onto the marble floor. Patricia's carefully styled hair was ruined. Her dress was ruined. But worse than that, her belief that she was loved by her grandparents, that she belonged in this family, that was ruined too. She stood there for 3 seconds in shock, and then she ran. Not to the bathroom, not to the garden, but straight to me, sobbing into my chest while 200 guests pretended to be fascinated by the ice sculptures. I held my daughter while she cried, and I felt something inside me that had been bending under pressure for years finally snap clean through. My mother tried to approach. "Julia, let's get her cleaned up," and I held up one hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Don't. Don't come near us. Don't speak to us. Don't even look at us." I pulled out my phone and made one call. Just one, 3 minutes long. Then I took Patricia to the bathroom, helped her clean up as best we could, and we walked back into that reception hall with our heads high. I whispered something in Patricia's ear that made her stop crying and look at me with wide eyes. We sat back down at table 7. We stayed for dinner. We smiled. We even danced to one song. My family looked relieved, like I'd decided to play along, to accept Patricia's humiliation as the price of admission to Brennan family events. They thought I'd folded. But here's what they didn't know. That phone call I made wasn't to my assistant or my lawyer or even a friend. It was to someone who had information they'd hidden for 15 years. Information that would shatter their perfect family illusion more thoroughly than any tantrum or dramatic exit ever could. And 30 minutes after I made that call, 3 things happened that started a chain reaction they never saw coming. First, Chase's best man approached him during the cake cutting and whispered something that made my brother go pale. Second, Vanessa's father received a phone call that made him excuse himself from the head table with a strained expression. Third, my mother's phone buzzed with a message that made her grip the table edge hard enough that her knuckles went white. I watched it all happen from table 7, holding Patricia's hand, and I didn't say a word. Because the thing about revenge isn't that it's sweet, it's that when done correctly, it's devastating. And I'd just set in motion something that would take everything my parents had built, every carefully constructed image they'd maintained, every secret they'd buried, and I was going to burn it all down. Not with fire, with truth. But that truth wouldn't come out tonight. Tonight, I just smiled and waited while my family slowly realized that something was very, very wrong. The reception continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. My mother kept checking her phone. My father disappeared for 20 minutes, came back looking 10 years older. Diane was arguing with Preston in hushed tones near the bar. Chase and Vanessa cut their cake, but Chase's smile looked painted on. And I just sat there with Patricia, watching it all unfold, because I knew something they didn't know I knew. I knew why my parents had really excluded Patricia. I knew what they'd been hiding about Cooper's parentage. I knew where Diane's husband's money actually came from. I knew what Chase had done to secure his position at Brennan Capital. And I knew that the person I'd called, the one person who had all the receipts, all the evidence, all the proof, was about to make sure everyone else knew too. But that revelation was still coming. That nuclear bomb was still in the air, waiting to land. The evening wound down. Guests started leaving. Chase and Vanessa departed in a vintage Rolls-Royce, heading to the airport for their honeymoon in Bali. My parents stood at the exit, playing perfect hosts until the last moment, thanking people for coming, accepting congratulations on the beautiful wedding. They didn't speak to me. They didn't acknowledge Patricia. We might as well have been invisible, which was fine because I was done needing their recognition. As we walked to our car, Patricia looked up at me and asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mom, why do they hate me?" I stopped, crouched down to her level right there in the parking lot, and told her the truth. "Baby, they don't hate you. They're just broken people who forgot what actually matters. And tomorrow, some things are going to change. Big things. Things that might seem scary, but are actually going to make our lives better. Do you trust me?" She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "Always." We drove back to our house in Stamford, 40 minutes from Greenwich, but a world away in terms of pretension. Our home isn't a mansion. It's a 4-bedroom colonial I bought with my own money that I furnished with furniture I chose in a neighborhood where people actually talk to each other. Patricia fell asleep on the drive, exhausted from crying and trying to be brave. I carried her inside, tucked her into bed, and then I sat down at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. The email was already there, waiting. 12 attachments. Documents, photos, financial records, DNA test results, legal filings, recorded conversations. Everything I needed to dismantle my family's carefully curated image. Everything I needed to show the world who Richard and Eleanor Brennan really were behind their charitable donations and society page smiles. I'd been gathering this information for 5 years, ever since my divorce, when I'd started seeing cracks in my family's facade, but I'd never planned to use it. I'd kept it as insurance, as protection, as a last resort. Tonight, my family had pushed me to that resort. I spent 3 hours going through every document, making sure everything was authenticated, verified, bulletproof. Then I drafted an email. Not to a newspaper or gossip site, to the people who mattered most in my parents' world, the board of Brennan Capital, the trustees of the charitable foundation they chaired, the admissions committee at the country club where my father had been a member for 30 years, the senior partners at Chase's firm, the investment group that backed Diane's husband's supposedly self-made business ventures, and about 50 other carefully selected recipients who had power in the circles my family desperately wanted to remain part of. The email was professional, factual, and absolutely ruthless. It detailed financial irregularities at Brennan Capital that my father had covered up. It included evidence that Chase had violated multiple SEC regulations to secure deals. It showed that Preston's business success was actually built on embezzled family trust funds, and it contained the DNA results that proved Cooper wasn't actually Diane's biological child, that she'd falsified medical records and lied about his paternity for 12 years to maintain her marriage to Preston, whose family would have cut them off if they'd known the truth. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the recordings. 6 years ago, I'd forgotten my phone at my parents' house after a family dinner. When I came back to get it, I'd heard my mother and Diane talking in the study. I'd stood outside that door and recorded the entire conversation without really understanding what I was hearing. Now, I understood perfectly. They'd been discussing Patricia, discussing whether to phase her out of family events, discussing how my divorce made me a liability to the Brennan image. My mother's voice on that recording, saying, "We'll still pretend to care, of course, send birthday cards, that sort of thing." But she's not really one of us, is she? Not with that father. We need to focus on the grandchildren who actually matter, Diane had agreed. Cooper and Madison are the only ones who will carry on the legacy anyway. Patricia's just Julia's mistake we have to tolerate. I'd tried to unhear it at the time. I'd convinced myself I'd misunderstood, but I hadn't. And now I had proof that their cruelty tonight wasn't a one-time thing. It was policy. My finger hovered over the send button for about 30 seconds. This would destroy them. This would end my father's career, Chase's reputation, Diane's marriage, my mother's social standing. Everything they'd built would collapse. But then I thought about Patricia's face when that champagne soaked through her dress. I thought about her asking why they hated her. I thought about Cooper calling her not really family and my parents nodding along. And I clicked send. 3:47 in the morning. That's when I sent the email that would change everything. Then I closed my laptop, poured myself a glass of wine, and went to bed. I slept better than I had in years, because for the first time since my divorce, I'd stopped trying to win my parents' approval. I'd stopped trying to fit into their version of who I should be. I'd stopped sacrificing my daughter's well-being for their comfort, and it felt like freedom. Morning came with 17 missed calls and 43 texts. I ignored all of them. Patricia and I had pancakes for breakfast, chocolate chip because it was Sunday and we deserved something good. She seemed lighter somehow, like crying out all that hurt had released something she'd been carrying. "Are we going to Grandma and Grandpa's for Sunday dinner?" she asked, drowning her pancakes in syrup. Every Sunday for the last 5 years, we'd driven to Greenwich for family dinner. Every Sunday, Patricia had tried to win their attention, their affection, their basic acknowledgement. Every Sunday, I'd watched her hope chip away a little more. "No, baby, no more Sunday dinners. We're done with that." She looked at me, processing this. "Forever?" I nodded. "Forever. We're going to spend Sundays doing things we actually enjoy. Museums, movies, hiking, whatever you want. Just us." She thought about this, then smiled. It was the first real smile I'd seen from her in months. "Can we get a dog?" I laughed. "We'll talk about it." My phone kept buzzing. I finally looked at the texts. They were from everyone. My mother, "Julia, what have you done? Call me immediately." My father, "You will regret this." Chase, "You vindictive bitch." Diane, "I'll destroy you for this." But there were other messages too, from the board chair at Brennan Capital thanking me for bringing the irregularities to their attention, from 3 of Chase's colleagues saying they'd suspected something was off for years, from Preston's own brother saying he'd always known Preston was a fraud, from 2 journalists asking if I'd be willing to comment on the allegations. The machine I'd set in motion was already churning, already tearing apart the carefully constructed lies my family had maintained for years, and I felt nothing but relief. Around noon, my mother showed up at my house. I saw her through the front window getting out of her Mercedes in yesterday's dress and jewelry, looking like she hadn't slept. I considered not answering the door, but I wanted to see her face. I wanted to hear what possible explanation she thought she could offer. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. "Julia," her voice was hoarse, "you need to send a retraction. You need to tell everyone those documents were fabricated, that you were having some kind of breakdown." I almost laughed. "No. Do you understand what you've done? Your father's entire career is over. Chase will probably face criminal charges. Diane's marriage is finished. The foundation is being investigated. Everything we've built, everything we are, everything you pretended to be," I corrected. "There's a difference." She tried to step inside.
I blocked her. "This is about last night, isn't it? About that silly incident with Patricia's dress? Julia, we can apologize. We can make it right." Silly incident. She called the deliberate humiliation of my 10-year-old daughter a silly incident? You called her the maid's daughter, Mom, your own granddaughter. You've spent years making her feel like she doesn't belong, like she's less than, like her only value is how little space she takes up. And last night, you all made that message crystal clear. So no, you can't apologize. You can't make it right, because you're not sorry she was hurt. You're sorry I had the receipts to hurt you back. My mother's carefully maintained composure cracked. "She's a child from a failed marriage, Julia. She doesn't have the right breeding, the right background. We have standards to maintain." And there it was, the truth she'd been too careful to say out loud before. Patricia wasn't good enough because her father wasn't from the right family, because I'd failed to produce an heir worthy of the Brennan name. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "If you come back, I'll call the police." She left, but not before delivering one final threat. "You'll never work in this town again. No one will touch you after this. You're finished." I closed the door and found Patricia standing in the hallway, her eyes wide. "Mom, was that Grandma?" I nodded. "What did she want?" I crouched down, took my daughter's hands. She wanted me to take back the truth, to pretend everything was fine, but I said no, because you're worth more than their approval. You're worth everything, baby, everything. Patricia hugged me tight, and I felt her shoulders shake. When she pulled back, she was crying, but they were different tears than last night. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, more than anything." The rest of that Sunday was quiet. We watched movies, ate popcorn, ignored the phone. But outside our little house, the world my parents had carefully constructed was burning to ash. By Monday morning, the story had hit Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal. Brennan Capital under investigation for financial irregularities. By Tuesday, Chase had been suspended from his firm, pending an internal review. By Wednesday, Diane's marriage had imploded in spectacular fashion, with Preston's family threatening legal action over the embezzlement. And by Thursday, my father had resigned from every board he sat on, every committee he chaired, every position he held. The fall was swift and absolute, and exactly what they deserved. But I wasn't done yet, because the real revenge, the part that would stick, wasn't just exposing their crimes and lies. It was rebuilding our lives without them, creating something better than anything they could have given us, showing Patricia that real family isn't about bloodlines and social status. It's about people who show up for you, who protect you, who love you for exactly who you are. And that's a lesson worth learning, even if it costs everything else. The question was, what would come next? Because I knew my family, and they didn't accept defeat gracefully. They'd regroup, they'd strategize, they'd find a way to strike back. But I was ready for whatever they tried, because I'd already lost the only thing they had power to take, my need for their approval. And a person with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous person in any room. That was something Eleanor and Richard Brennan were about to learn the hard way. 3 weeks after Chase's wedding, I was sitting in a conference room at Caldwell & Associates when my boss walked in with an expression I couldn't quite read. Patricia was at school, I'd just closed a deal with a tech startup worth 6 figures in billing, and I was feeling pretty good about my decision to burn down my family's empire. Then Margaret Caldwell, the woman who'd hired me 8 years ago and taught me everything about crisis management, sat down across from me and said, "Julia, we need to talk about your parents." My stomach dropped, because I knew what was coming. The Brennan name carried weight in Connecticut, and my father had called in every favor, leveraged every connection, applied pressure in every corner where he still had influence.
Margaret folded her hands on the table, and I saw regret in her eyes. They've made it clear that any firm working with you will lose their business and the business of everyone in their network. I fought for you, Julia. I really did, but the other partners voted this morning. I'm sorry. I was being fired, not for poor performance or ethical violations or anything I'd actually done wrong. I was being fired because Richard Brennan was proving my mother's prediction right. I would never work in this town again. I cleaned out my office in under an hour, said goodbye to colleagues who couldn't meet my eyes, and drove home in a daze. This was their countermove. They couldn't restore their reputation, couldn't undo the investigations or the news coverage or the social exile, but they could hurt me financially, professionally, make sure I paid a price for exposing them. That night, after Patricia went to bed, I sat at my kitchen table staring at my laptop screen and doing math I didn't want to do. Severance would cover maybe 4 months of expenses. After that, I would need a job, and apparently, every firm in Connecticut had gotten the message about me being untouchable. I could move to New York, start over in a bigger market where the Brennan name meant less, but that would mean uprooting Patricia from her school, her friends, the stability she desperately needed right now. I poured a glass of wine and allowed myself 5 minutes of self-pity. Then I remembered something my divorce lawyer had told me 3 years ago, something I'd filed away and almost forgotten. Emily Rodriguez had been ruthless in securing my settlement and made sure my ex-husband paid appropriately for his infidelity. And at the end of it all, she handed me her card and said, "If you ever need someone to go to war for you again, call me. You're a fighter, Julia. I like fighters." I called Emily the next morning. We met at a coffee shop in Stamford, far from Greenwich's watchful eyes. Emily was early 40s, sharp as glass, with a reputation for taking on cases other lawyers considered unwinnable. She ordered a double espresso and listened while I explained everything: the wedding, the exposure, the firing, my parents' systematic campaign to destroy my career. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Can they do this? I mean, legally?" I asked. Emily smiled, and it wasn't friendly. "They can try, but here's what they don't know. Connecticut has very specific laws about blacklisting and tortious interference with business relationships. If we can prove your father is actively sabotaging your employment prospects, using threats and coercion against potential employers, that's actionable. We can sue not just for damages, but for injunctive relief. We can make them stop." Hope flickered in my chest. "How do we prove it?" Emily pulled out her phone. "We set a trap." The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Emily had a friend who ran a boutique PR firm in Hartford, far enough from Greenwich to not be in my father's immediate circle, but prestigious enough that they'd realistically hire someone with my credentials. We submitted my application under my maiden name variant, using references from clients who'd specifically requested to work with me. The firm loved my portfolio. They called me in for 3 interviews. The managing partner, Simon Jeffries, made it clear he wanted to hire me. "You're exactly what we need. Your work with Caldwell was exceptional. We can offer you senior partner track, full benefits, and honestly, Julia, I think you'll thrive here." I accepted the offer pending reference checks and background verification, standard procedure. Then Emily had Simon make one call. He reached out to Richard Brennan directly, mentioned he was considering hiring me, asked for an informal reference as a professional courtesy. My father's response was captured on a recording that, thanks to Connecticut's one-party consent law, was perfectly legal. "Simon, I'll be blunt. Julia is toxic. She's vindictive, unstable, and hiring her will cost you every connection I have in the state. I'll make sure every client we share knows about her mental health issues and her tendency to fabricate stories when she doesn't get her way. Trust me, you don't want that liability." Mental health issues, fabricated stories. My own father was slandering me to potential employers, making claims he couldn't prove because they weren't true. Simon thanked him for his time, hung up, and immediately forwarded the recording to Emily. "That's defamation," Emily said, listening to it for the 3rd time, "and tortious interference, and possibly criminal intimidation depending on how far he's taken this with other firms." The trap had worked. We had him on record, but Emily wanted more. "We need to show pattern and practice. One conversation could be dismissed as a misunderstanding. We need multiple instances."
Over the next 2 weeks, I applied to 6 different firms under slate name variations, each time with Emily's Hartford friend making a reference call to my father. Each time, Richard Brennan said essentially the same thing. Hiring me would be a liability, I was unstable, I had fabricated the documents about Brennan Capital, anyone who employed me would face consequences. 6 recorded conversations, 6 clear instances of defamation and interference, 6 pieces of evidence that my parents weren't just defending themselves, but actively trying to destroy my ability to earn a living. "We can file next week," Emily said. "But Julia, you need to understand what this means. Your parents will fight back hard. They'll make this as ugly and public as possible. They'll drag Patricia into it, claim you're using her as a weapon, maybe even try to argue that your behavior proves you're an unfit parent. Are you ready for that?" I thought about Patricia asking why her grandparents hated her. I thought about my daughter's champagne-soaked dress. I'm ready. We filed the lawsuit on a Tuesday morning, Julia Brennan v. Richard and Eleanor Brennan, seeking damages for defamation, tortious interference, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and injunctive relief to stop their campaign against my employment. The complaint was 30 pages of documented harm, recorded conversations, lost opportunities, and emotional damage to both me and Patricia. We held a press conference that afternoon. Emily had invited every outlet that had covered the original Brennan Capital scandal. I stood in front of those cameras and microphones and told the truth. My parents have spent the last month trying to ensure I can't work, can't support my daughter, can't build a life outside their control. They've lied to potential employers, threatened business contacts, and used their influence to blacklist me across Connecticut. This lawsuit is about holding them accountable for using their power to hurt the people who dare to stand up to them. The story went viral within hours, not just in Connecticut, but nationally. Because it wasn't just about a wealthy family's internal drama anymore. It was about abuse of power, about parents trying to financially destroy their own daughter for exposing their crimes, about the lengths some people will go to maintain control. By that evening, I'd received calls from 3 major law firms in New York offering me positions. By the next morning, 4 of the companies my father had pressured to not work with me had publicly apologized and expressed interest in hiring me for freelance projects. The tide was turning, but the real shock came on Thursday. Diane called me, not texted, called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want?" I asked, no preamble. Her voice was small, strained, nothing like her usual polished confidence. "Julia, can we meet? Just you and me, please." We met at a park halfway between our houses, neutral territory where no one would recognize us. Diane looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt instead of her usual designer everything. She sat down on a bench and stared at her hands for a long moment. "Preston left me," she finally said, "took the kids and moved back to Boston. His family's lawyers are filing for divorce and full custody. They're using the DNA results you released as evidence I'm a liar and manipulator." I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt nothing. "You humiliated my daughter at Chase's wedding. You poured champagne on her. You called her not really family. Why would I care what's happening to you now?" Diane's eyes filled with tears. "Because Cooper isn't Preston's biological son, but he is our son. I love him, and they're going to take him away from me because of what you did." I stood up to leave, but she grabbed my arm. "Wait, please. There's something you don't know, something Mom and Dad made me do." I sat back down because I could hear real desperation in her voice, and beneath my anger, there was still a part of me that remembered loving my sister before all this. "Talk fast." Diane took a shaky breath. 12 years ago, I had an affair. I got pregnant. Preston and I had been trying for 2 years with no success, and I made a mistake with someone else. When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. Preston's family would have cut us off if they knew, so Mom and Dad helped me fake the paternity. They paid off the lab, falsified medical records, made sure it looked like Cooper was Preston's biological child. I thought it was over, buried, but they held it over me for the next 12 years. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "What do you mean, held it over you?"
Every time I questioned them, every time I pushed back on something they wanted, they'd remind me what they'd done for me. They'd remind me that they could expose the truth anytime they wanted, ruin my life, destroy my marriage. They made me do things, Julia, terrible things. She was crying now, really crying, her whole body shaking. The way we treated Patricia wasn't my idea. I mean, I went along with it, and I'm so sorry for that. But Mom and Dad insisted. They said Patricia made our family look bad, that having a divorced daughter with a middle-class background lowered the Brennan brand. They wanted her erased from family events, excluded from photos. They threatened to expose me if I didn't comply. I stared at my sister, trying to process this. You're saying Mom and Dad blackmailed you to treat your own niece like garbage? Diane nodded miserably. They controlled all of us, Julia. Chase, too. Why do you think he did those illegal deals at Brennan Capital? Dad pushed him into it, said it was necessary to maintain the firm's position, and when Chase hesitated, Dad reminded him who'd paid for his MBA, who'd given him his position, who could take it all away.
This was bigger than I'd thought. This wasn't just a family with warped priorities. This was systematic manipulation and control. My parents using secrets and leverage to force their children into compliance. Why are you telling me this now? Diane wiped her eyes. Because I'm done protecting them. Because I've lost everything anyway. And because you deserve to know that what they did to Patricia, what they made us do to Patricia, it's part of a pattern. They destroy anyone who doesn't fit their vision of perfection. They've been doing it for decades, and there's proof. She pulled a flash drive from her purse. This has recordings, emails, documents showing everything. How they blackmailed me, how they pressured Chase, how they've manipulated situations to maintain control over all of us, how they've destroyed other people who got in their way. I'm giving it to you because you're the only one brave enough to actually use it. I took the flash drive, my hand shaking slightly. What's on here about Patricia specifically? Diane's face crumpled. There's an email chain between Mom and Dad from 7 years ago, right after your divorce. They discuss different strategies for minimizing Patricia's presence in the family. They actually created a plan, Julia, a step-by-step plan to phase her out over time so it wouldn't look deliberate. They were always going to do this to her. The wedding was just when they stopped hiding it. I felt rage so pure it was almost blinding. My parents hadn't just rejected Patricia in a moment of snobbery. They'd plotted it. They'd strategized her exclusion like a business deal. There's more, Diane continued. Audio recordings of Mom talking about Patricia with her friends, saying disgusting things. Video of Dad at the club telling people Patricia isn't really his granddaughter. Text messages about how they planned to write her out of their will entirely. Everything you need to show that their cruelty was calculated and deliberate. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop that night and spent 5 hours going through every file. Diane hadn't been exaggerating. There were dozens of documents showing my parents' manipulation of their own children, their systematic abuse of power, their calculated cruelty toward Patricia specifically. But the worst was a video from a charity luncheon 2 years ago. My mother, Eleanor Brennan, sitting at a table with 6 other wealthy Connecticut women, 3 glasses of wine deep, being recorded by someone's phone that was filming table conversations for a retrospective video. One of the women asked about grandchildren, and my mother's response was caught perfectly in audio and video. Well, we have 2 real grandchildren, Cooper and Madison, absolute lights of our lives. Julia has a daughter, but you know, that situation is just unfortunate. Wrong father, wrong circumstances. We do our duty by her, but she's not really family material, if you understand me. The other women had laughed. They'd actually laughed at my 10-year-old daughter being dismissed as not really family material. I sat there in my kitchen, watching my mother smile as she said those words, and something inside me went from rage to ice-cold determination. They hadn't just hurt Patricia, they'd humiliated her publicly, systematically, for years, and now I had the evidence to prove it.
Emily's eyes lit up when I showed her the flash drive contents the next morning. This changes everything. This isn't just defamation and interference anymore. This is a pattern of psychological abuse, documented evidence of intentional infliction of emotional distress on a minor child. Julia, with this, we can go for their throats. We can push for punitive damages that will actually hurt them financially. We can make this so ugly that they'll wish they'd just treated Patricia with basic human decency. We amended the lawsuit, adding new claims and new evidence. The filing was now 60 pages long, absolutely devastating in its detail. We included transcripts of the recordings, screenshots of the emails, stills from that charity luncheon video, and we added Patricia as a co-plaintiff, suing her own grandparents for emotional abuse and the trauma they deliberately inflicted. My parents' lawyers tried to get the case dismissed, claiming family disputes weren't appropriate for court intervention. The judge disagreed. If the allegations in this complaint are true, Judge Marion Foster said during the hearing, then we're talking about systematic emotional abuse of a child by her own grandparents. That is absolutely a matter for this court. Trial was set for 3 months out, but we never made it to trial because something happened that none of us expected. Chase came to see me. It was late on a Saturday night, almost 11 p.m. Patricia was asleep upstairs. I heard the doorbell and considered ignoring it, but then Chase's voice came through the door. "Jules, please, I need to talk to you. It's important." I opened the door but didn't let him in past the entryway. My brother looked like he'd aged 10 years, stubble on his face, clothes wrinkled, eyes bloodshot. "What do you want?" Chase ran a hand through his hair. "I'm testifying for you in your case against Mom and Dad. I'm going to tell the court everything." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "What?" He pulled out his phone, showed me an email to Emily's office from his lawyer, confirming his intent to provide testimony and evidence supporting our claims. I'm done protecting them. I'm done pretending this is normal. What they did to Patricia, what they've done to all of us, it's not okay. And I should have said something at the wedding. I should have stood up for her. I didn't, and I'm sorry. I wanted to slam the door in his face, but I also saw something in my brother I hadn't seen in years. Actual remorse. Why now? Chase slumped against the doorframe. "Because Vanessa's pregnant. We found out last week, and I started thinking about this kid, about how Mom and Dad will treat them if they don't meet their standards, about whether they'll plot to exclude my child the way they plotted to exclude yours. And I realized I can't let them near my kid until I deal with what they are, what they've always been." He looked at me, really looked at me. "They broke us, Jules. They broke all of us. Diane's destroyed. I'm probably facing criminal charges. You're blacklisted from your career. And Patricia, that beautiful little girl who never did anything wrong, she's been emotionally tortured by her own grandparents since she was born. When does it stop? When do we finally say enough?" Chase's testimony was the final nail. He provided emails showing our parents' pressure to engage in illegal deals. He described years of manipulation and control. He gave specific examples of our parents discussing Patricia in derogatory terms. He confirmed everything Diane said about the blackmail, and he did it under oath, in a deposition that took 6 hours and left our parents' lawyers looking shock-shelled. With both of their children testifying against them, with documentation supporting every claim, with video evidence of my mother's cruelty, my parents' legal position collapsed. Their lawyers recommended settlement. Emily negotiated with a ruthlessness that made me grateful she was on my side. The final settlement included $5 million to Patricia's trust fund to be held independently and accessed for her education and future. A formal public apology from Richard and Eleanor Brennan acknowledging their mistreatment of their granddaughter, a legally binding agreement that they would have no contact with Patricia without her explicit consent, and a separate payment to me of $2 million for career damages and emotional distress.
But the money wasn't the victory. The victory was the apology press conference. My parents, standing in front of cameras, looking diminished and defeated, reading a statement their lawyers had written. "We acknowledge that we failed in our duty to our granddaughter, Patricia.
We allowed social pressures and misguided priorities to override our familial obligations. We caused her pain, and for that, we are deeply sorry. We hope that someday she can forgive us, though we understand we have no right to expect that forgiveness." Eleanor's voice cracked on the last sentence. Richard couldn't look at the cameras. It was everything I'd needed them to say 3 weeks ago at Chase's wedding. It was 3 years too late. But Patricia watched that press conference with me, and when it was over, she looked up and asked, "Does this mean they understand they were wrong?" I nodded. "Yes, baby, they understand." She thought about this. "I don't think I want to see them anymore, even if they apologize. Is that okay?" I hugged her tight. "That is absolutely okay. You get to decide who's in your life, Patricia, and if you decide you never want to see them again, I will support that completely. You don't owe them forgiveness. You don't owe them anything." She nodded against my chest. "Good, because I have a real family. I have you, and Aunt Diane's been texting me, asking if we can hang out. She seems sad but nice now. And Uncle Chase brought me those books I wanted last week. That's enough family for me." And she was right. That was enough. Because family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when things get hard. It's about who protects you, who fights for you, who loves you without conditions or reservations. Diane had lost her marriage, but gained perspective. She was rebuilding her relationship with Cooper on honest foundations, going to therapy, learning to be a person outside my parents' control. We met for coffee once a week now, and slowly, carefully, we were becoming sisters again. Chase had taken a plea deal on the SEC charges, got probation and community service, lost his position at Brennan Capital, but found work at a smaller firm that valued ethics over connections. He came to Patricia's violin recitals. He remembered her birthday. He was trying, genuinely trying to be the uncle she deserved. And me? I took a job with a New York firm, senior partner position, better salary than I'd had at Caldwell. I worked from home 3 days a week, made every school event, prioritized Patricia in ways my parents had never prioritized any of us. We got the dog she'd asked for, a rescue mutt named Bailey, who slept at the foot of her bed and had anxiety that matched Patricia's perfectly. We spent Sundays hiking or going to museums or just reading books on the couch. We built a life that had nothing to do with the Brennan name or Greenwich society or maintaining appearances. 3 months after the settlement, Patricia came home from school with a form for family tree projects. She showed it to me nervously. "We have to include grandparents. What do I do?" I looked at the form, at the blank spaces for maternal and paternal grandparents, and I made a decision. You put down the people who act like grandparents, even if they're not technically. Emily, my lawyer, she's been pretty grandma-like, hasn't she? Patricia's face brightened. "She brings me cookies when she visits." I smiled, then put her down. "And Simon from Hartford, he's been kind of grandfatherly." Patricia nodded enthusiastically. "He taught me about birds last month." She filled out her family tree with Emily and Simon in the grandparent spots, with Diane and Chase as aunt and uncle, with a note at the bottom that said, "Family is who loves you, not just who you're related to." Her teacher called me the next day to tell me it was the best family tree essay she'd read in 15 years of teaching. 6 months after the settlement, my parents tried to reach out through Chase. They wanted to see Patricia, to make amends, to have a relationship. I let Patricia decide. She thought about it for a week, talked to her therapist about it, and then gave me her answer. "Maybe when I'm older, maybe when I'm ready, but right now I'm happy with the family I have. I don't need more people who might hurt me." I relayed that message exactly as she'd said it. My parents sent a gift for her birthday anyway, an expensive American Girl doll with accessories. Patricia donated it to a children's hospital. "Some kid who really needs a grandma will love that," she said. And I was so proud of her I could barely breathe. She was choosing herself, protecting herself, setting boundaries that I hadn't learned to set until I was 42 years old. 1 year after Chase's wedding, Patricia and I were having dinner at our kitchen table when she asked me a question I'd been dreading. "Mom, do you think I'll ever stop feeling sad about Grandma and Grandpa?" I put down my fork and took her hand. "I think the sadness will get smaller. I think it'll hurt less over time. But I also think it's okay to be sad about it, because you deserved grandparents who loved you unconditionally, and you didn't get that. It's okay to grieve what you should have had." She nodded slowly. "I'm glad you stood up for me, even though it was scary and hard. I squeezed her hand. "You're worth standing up for. You're worth fighting for. And I will always, always protect you, no matter what it costs me." She smiled, that resilient, beautiful smile that still amazed me every day. I know, that's why we're going to be okay. And we were okay. Better than okay, actually, because I learned something important through all of this. Revenge isn't about destroying the people who hurt you. Real revenge is building a life so good, so full, so rich with actual love and connection that their absence doesn't leave a hole. Real revenge is teaching your daughter that her value doesn't depend on other people's recognition. Real revenge is choosing authenticity over acceptance, truth over comfort, self-respect over family approval. My parents had tried to make Patricia feel small, insignificant, less than. But by fighting back, by exposing their cruelty, by refusing to accept their treatment, I'd shown her something more valuable than any trust fund or social connection. I'd shown her that she was worth fighting for, that her dignity mattered, that no one, not even family, gets to diminish her without consequences. 2 years after the wedding, Patricia started 6th grade with confidence I never had at her age. She made friends easily, joined the debate team, started writing stories about girls who saved themselves instead of waiting to be rescued. She talked about wanting to be a lawyer someday, like Emily, someone who fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. And when people asked about her grandparents, she said simply, "I don't really see them, but I have a great mom and a cool aunt and uncle. I'm good." My parents sold the Belhaven house and moved to Florida. They resigned from all their remaining boards and committees. They faded from Greenwich society like they'd never been central to it. Richard's health declined. Eleanor's friends stopped calling. The empire they'd built on appearances and manipulation crumbled because it had no foundation beyond their own egos. And me? I learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who should love you but don't. I learned that protecting your child is more important than maintaining family peace. I learned that standing up for yourself might cost you everything, but the alternative costs you your soul. I learned that revenge doesn't have to be cruel or violent. Sometimes revenge is just refusing to be silent about abuse. Sometimes it's speaking truth when truth is uncomfortable. Sometimes it's teaching the next generation that they don't have to accept cruelty just because it comes from family. Patricia asked me once if I regretted exposing my parents, if I wished I'd handled things differently. I told her the truth. The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner. I regret every Sunday dinner where I watched them ignore you. I regret every time I made excuses for their behavior. I regret that you spent years thinking you weren't good enough, when the truth was they were never good enough for you. The moral of this story isn't complicated. It's simple, actually. People who abuse power don't stop until they're forced to stop. Family members who hurt you don't magically become better people because you stay silent. And children are watching everything, learning from every interaction, internalizing every message about their worth. If I hadn't made that one phone call at Chase's wedding, if I hadn't exposed my parents, if I hadn't fought back with everything I had, Patricia would have grown up believing she was less than. She would have internalized their rejection. She would have spent her life trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it. Instead, she's growing up knowing that her mother will move heaven and earth to protect her, that her worth isn't negotiable, that people who mistreat her face consequences. Those lessons are worth more than any inheritance, any social connection, any family approval. Chase called me last month to tell me his daughter was born. He named her Patricia, middle name Grace, after the bravest person I know, he said. I want my daughter to grow up with her cousin, away from the toxicity we were raised in. I want her to learn from Patricia that you don't have to accept mistreatment from anyone, even family, especially family. Diane's divorce finalized, and she got shared custody of Cooper and Madison. She's dating someone now, a high school teacher who makes her laugh and doesn't care about her last name or her portfolio. She tells me she's happier than she's been in 20 years. "You freed us," she said recently over coffee. "You freed all of us by refusing to play the game anymore." But I didn't free them. They freed themselves by choosing to stop protecting our parents, by choosing truth over comfort, by choosing to build lives based on who they actually were instead of who Richard and Eleanor wanted them to be. Last week, Patricia asked if we could write to Emily to thank her for everything she'd done. We sat together and composed a letter about courage and fighting for what's right, and how Emily had taught us both that justice matters. Emily wrote back with a response that made both of us cry. Patricia, you saved yourself by being brave enough to have a mother who fought for you. Your mom saved you by being willing to lose everything to protect you. I just helped with the paperwork. The courage was all yours. And maybe that's the real ending to this story, not the settlement or the apology or my parents' downfall. The real ending is a 12-year-old girl who knows her value, who has boundaries, who understands that love shouldn't hurt. The real ending is a mother who learned to prioritize her child over toxic family dynamics. The real ending is a family rebuilt on honesty instead of appearances. I still see my parents occasionally, from a distance. At Chase's daughter's christening last month, they were there, but we didn't speak. They looked older, smaller, diminished. They tried to approach Patricia, but she stepped behind me, and I shook my head. They retreated. Later, my mother sent a text. She's growing up beautiful. We've missed so much. I didn't respond, but I showed Patricia the message. Do you want to reply? I asked. She thought about it. No. They had their chance. They chose wrong. That's on them, not us. 12 years old and already wiser than most adults I know. That's what happens when you teach a child that their voice matters, that their feelings are valid, that they don't have to accept cruelty just because it comes from family. Patricia is growing up strong and sure and unbroken because I chose her over them. Every single time, every hard decision, every uncomfortable confrontation, every burned bridge, I chose her. And that choice, that one phone call at the wedding that set everything in motion, that decision to stop protecting people who were hurting my daughter, that's the choice I'll never regret. Because family isn't about blood or last names or social standing. Family is about who shows up when things are hard. Family is about who protects you, who fights for you, who loves you without conditions. And by that definition, Patricia and I have plenty of family, just not the family Richard and Eleanor Brennan wanted us to have. We have the family we built, the family we chose, the family that actually matters. And that family is unbreakable because it's built on honesty and love and mutual respect. That's something my parents never understood, and now it's too late for them to learn. Their loss, our gain. And honestly, I'm perfectly fine with that. Patricia turns 13 next month. She wants to have a party with 15 friends, nothing fancy, just pizza and movies and the kind of chaos that comes with teenage girls having fun. No dress code, no society photographers, no appearances to maintain. Just a kid celebrating being a kid, surrounded by people who love her for exactly who she is. And I'll be there, probably crying into the cake, because that's what she deserved all along. That's what every child deserves, to be celebrated, protected, and loved without conditions or qualifications. My parents couldn't give her that, but I can, and I will, every day for the rest of my life. That's my revenge. That's my victory. That's my happily ever after. Not perfect, not fancy, not impressive in Greenwich standards, but ours. Authentically, completely, beautifully ours. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It means more than you think. I appreciate every one of you for being here, so don't forget to subscribe. The next story is already on its way. Until then, stay safe and believe in yourself.